I thought he was just sleeping in. That was the lie I told myself as I stood on the porch, my breath clouding in the freezing December air, knocking for the third time. The wood of the front door was cold and unforgiving under my knuckles. It was Christmas morning, 8 a.m. sharp. For the last 20 years, ever since I was a boy old enough to ride a bike, 8 a.m. on Christmas meant the smell of burning oak in the fireplace, the sound of Nat King Cole playing softly on the vintage record player, and the aroma of roasted coffee and cinnamon wafting through the cracks of this old Victorian house. But today there was nothing, no music, no smell of coffee, just the biting wind, rattling the wind chimes my grandmother had hung up years before she died. Silence has a weight to it, a physical presence that presses against your chest, and the silence coming from inside my grandfather's house was heavy enough to crush me. I used the spare key hidden under the potted fern. A cliché spot, I always told him, but he never changed it. The lock tumbled with a stiff click, a sound that echoed too loudly in the morning stillness. I pushed the door open. "Grandpa?" My voice cracked. It wasn't the confident greeting of a grandson coming for breakfast. It was the tentative, fearful call of someone who already knew something was wrong. The hallway was dark. The curtains were drawn tight. The air inside was stale, lacking the warmth that usually greeted me. It felt abandoned. I walked into the living room, my boots leaving wet snowprints on the hardwood floor, violating the pristine order he always kept. The Christmas tree was there in the corner, decorated with the same ornaments we had used since the 80s, but the lights were off. It looked like a skeleton in the shadows. And then I saw it. The dining table was set for one. Not for breakfast, but just a cleared space in the center of the lace tablecloth. Sitting there, anchored by his heavy brass lighter, was a piece of paper torn from a yellow legal pad. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that drowned out the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I walked over, my legs feeling like they were moving through water. I picked up the note. His handwriting, usually a sharp, disciplined cursive born of military service and architectural drafting, was shaky. It looked rushed. It read, "Leo, don't look for me today. Go home to your parents. I have something to do that I should have done a long time ago. Merry Christmas." That was it. No explanation, no location, just a goodbye that felt terrifyingly final. I dropped the note, and for the first time in my adult life, pure, unadulterated panic seized me by the throat. To understand why that note felt like a knife in the gut, you have to understand Arthur Vance. My grandfather wasn't a man of whims. He was a creature of absolute, unbreakable habit. He was a retired structural engineer and a veteran of the Korean War, a man who believed that chaos was simply a lack of preparation. Since my grandmother Eleanor passed away 5 years ago, his life had shrunk into a precise, predictable grid. He woke up at 6 a.m., he drank tea at 6:30, he read the paper until 7:30, and on Christmas, the routine was sacred. He lived for this morning. It was the one day of the year he allowed himself to be sentimental, to tell stories, to actually smile with his eyes. He would never, absolutely never, abandon the ritual. He treated tradition like a structural load-bearing wall. If you removed it, the whole house would collapse. I stood there in the dim living room, gripping the back of his favorite leather armchair. I'm Leo, 28 years old, a junior architect trying to live up to the legacy of a man who built half the bridges in this county. I loved him, but I also feared for him. For the last 6 months, I had noticed the cracks, not big ones, just hairline fractures in his armor. He would stare out the window for hours, forgetting his tea until it went cold. He would start a sentence about 1952 and then trail off, waving his hand as if swatting away a fly, muttering, "It doesn't matter now." I had suggested a doctor, a neurologist, fearing the early onset of dementia, but he had snapped at me with a ferocity that silenced the room. My mind is fine, Leo. It's my soul that's tired. I hadn't understood what he meant then. I thought it was just grief, the long tale of mourning Eleanor. I thought he was just lonely. The house around me felt like a museum of a life that had suddenly ended. I looked at the mantel. Photos of me, photos of my parents, and the center shrine. A black and white photo of him and Grandma on their wedding day, and next to it, a photo of him in uniform with his platoon. I checked his medication organizer on the sideboard. Sunday morning's pills were still there, beta blockers for his heart, blood thinners. He hadn't taken them. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. If he was out there in the freezing cold, without his medication, stressed and confused, this wasn't just a disappearance. It was a ticking clock. I have something to do that I should have done a long time ago. The sentence looped in my head. What could that possibly be? Was it suicide? The thought made my knees weak. He was a stoic man, but stoicism is often just a dam holding back an ocean of pain. Had the dam finally broken on Christmas morning? I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so bad, I mistyped my dad's number twice. When I finally hit dial, it went straight to voicemail. They were on a cruise in the Caribbean. A gift I had helped pay for, completely unreachable for another 4 hours. I was alone in this. The silence of the house seemed to mock me. I looked around for clues, trying to channel the logical part of my brain, the part he had trained. Observe, Leo. Analyze. Deduce. I forced myself to breathe. The house wasn't just empty, it was staged. The dishes were done, the trash was taken out. He hadn't fled in a panic. He had left with intention. This was a mission. I started the search in the master bedroom. It was immaculate, the bed made with military precision, the corners tucked tight enough to bounce a quarter off, but the closet door was slightly ajar. I swung it open. His heavy wool trench coat, the charcoal one he only wore for funerals and high mass, was gone. His good fedora was missing from the top shelf. I looked down at the shoe rack. His polished leather dress shoes were gone, replaced by his everyday slippers. He hadn't wandered off in confusion. He had dressed up. He had put on his Sunday best to vanish. This detail didn't comfort me, it terrified me. People dress up for momentous occasions, weddings, church, and the end. I ran back to the kitchen, my mind racing. Where would he go? The cemetery? It was the most logical choice. Grandma was buried at St. Jude's, about 5 miles away. Maybe he wanted to be with her. Maybe he wanted to lay down in the snow beside her stone and simply go to sleep. The image was so vivid, so horrifying, that I almost threw up in the sink. I grabbed my keys, ready to bolt, but then I saw something in the trash bin. It was a small, crumpled piece of paper. I fished it out and smoothed it against the counter. It wasn't a receipt. It was a page torn from an old address book, the leather-bound one he kept in his desk drawer, the one that smelled like tobacco and ink. The page was for the letter H. Most of the names were crossed out, people long dead or forgotten. But one name was circled in fresh, shaky blue ink, Holloway. There was no address, just a phone number with an area code that didn't exist anymore, and a scrawled note underneath. The Sunrise Home, room 304. I stared at it. I had never heard the name Holloway. Not once in 28 years. Grandpa's circle was small, family, a few guys from the VFW, and the church. Who was Holloway? And why was this name worth skipping his heart medication and walking out into a blizzard for? I didn't have time to Google. I needed to move. I ran out to my car, the icy wind slapping my face, and peeled out of the driveway. But as I reached the end of the street, I saw Mrs. Higgins, the neighborhood watch incarnate, shoveling her driveway. She was wearing a neon pink parka that looked like a beacon in the gray morning. I slammed on the brakes and rolled down the window. "Mrs. Higgins, have you seen Arthur?" She leaned on her shovel, squinting at me. "Leo, Merry Christmas, dear. You just missed him." Missed him? When? I practically screamed, gripping the steering wheel. About 2 hours ago, maybe 6:30. It was still dark, but I saw the headlights. A taxi came for him, a yellow cab. I thought it was strange, seeing as you usually drive him everywhere. He looked determined. He was carrying that old wooden box he keeps on the high shelf in his study, the one with the lock. The box. My blood ran cold. The locked mahogany box. I had asked him about it once when I was 10. He had told me very sternly that it contained ghosts, and I was never to touch it. I had assumed it was war medals or shrapnel. If he had taken the box, he wasn't going to the cemetery. You don't take ghosts to a grave, you take them to the living. Did you hear the driver? Did he say where he was going? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. Mrs. Higgins frowned, thinking. I didn't hear him say it, but the taxi company was City Cab. And Leo, he didn't look like a man going to a Christmas party. He looked like a man going to court. He looked scared. Thank you, I yelled, rolling up the window before she could ask why I looked so frantic. City Cab. I dialed their dispatch number as I drove, swerving slightly on a patch of black ice. The phone rang and rang. It was Christmas morning. They were probably running on a skeleton crew. Finally, a tired voice answered. City Cab, please hold. No, don't put me on hold. This is an emergency. My grandfather, Arthur Vance, took a cab from 42 Elm Street at 6:30 a.m. He has a heart condition. I need to know where you dropped him off. It's a matter of life and death. There was a pause, the sound of typing on a keyboard. Sir, I can't give out passenger information. Listen to me, I shouted, my voice breaking. He is 85 years old. He left a suicide note. If you don't tell me where he is and something happens to him, I will make sure the entire city knows you let a veteran die on Christmas because of protocol. Please, just tell me the drop-off. The dispatcher sighed, the humanity breaking through the bureaucracy. Okay, calm down. Let me check the log. Driver 42, pick up at Elm. Drop-off was... Weird place for Christmas morning. Where? I demanded, my knuckles white on the wheel. The old train station downtown. The one they converted into that assisted living facility. The Sunrise Home. But sir, that place is on the other side of the river. The roads are terrible out there. The Sunrise Home. It matched the note in the trash. The circle was closing. But why a nursing home? Who was he visiting? And why did he need the locked box? Thank you. I hung up and floored the accelerator. The roads were slick, covered in a fresh layer of powder. My car fishtailed as I turned onto the highway ramp. The city was a ghost town. Lights twinkling in windows where happy families were opening gifts, oblivious to the drama unfolding in my sedan. I felt a surge of anger towards my grandfather. How could he do this? How could he scare me like this? But beneath the anger was a profound sadness. I realized I didn't know him. Not really. I knew the grandfather who taught me to fish and who corrected my math homework. I didn't know the man Arthur Vance. I didn't know his secrets. I didn't know who Holloway was. As I crossed the bridge over the river, the snow started falling harder, turning the world into a white blur. Visibility dropped to near zero. I had to slow down. The tension in the car was suffocating. Every red light felt like a personal insult. Every minute that passed was a minute his heart was beating without the medication that kept it steady. I reached the other side of the city, the industrial district where the Sunrise Home was located. It was a bleak brick building that used to be a terminal, now retrofitted with ramps and safety rails. I pulled up to the front entrance, abandoning my car in the ambulance-only zone. I didn't care. I grabbed my phone and ran inside. The lobby smelled of antiseptic and pine air freshener, a depressing attempt to mask the scent of age and illness. A young receptionist with reindeer antlers on her head looked up, startled by my frantic entrance. "Arthur Vance!" I gasped, leaning over the desk. "Did he check in? Is he here?" She blinked, confused. "Sir, you need to sign in." I'm not a visitor. I'm family. My grandfather is missing, and I know he came here. Arthur Vance. Or maybe he's looking for someone named Holloway. The receptionist's face changed when I said Holloway. A shadow passed over her eyes. She looked down at her register, then back at me, her expression softening into something like pity. "Mr. Vance isn't a resident," she said softly, "but he is here. He's in the East Wing, room 304. But, sir, you can't just barge in there. The nurses are with them now. It's a delicate situation." "Delicate," I snapped. "He's off his meds, and he left a goodbye note. I'm going in." I didn't wait for her permission. I pushed past the desk and sprinted down the hallway towards the East Wing. The corridors seemed endless, lined with wheelchairs and decorations that felt too cheerful for the heaviness in the air. Room 300, 302, 304. The door was closed. I stopped in front of it, my chest heaving. I could hear voices inside. One was a low, murmuring baritone, my grandfather. The other was weak, raspy, barely a whisper. I raised my hand to push the door open, but then I heard my grandfather's voice clearly, trembling with an emotion I had never heard him express. He was crying. "I didn't know," Arthur sobbed. "I swear to God, Thomas, I didn't know you survived." I froze. My hand hovered over the handle. Thomas? The name meant nothing to me, but the agony in my grandfather's voice was enough to shatter my heart. I wasn't just interrupting a visit. I was standing on the threshold of a secret that had been buried for half a century. I took a deep breath and I pushed the door open. The room was warm, suffocatingly so, in stark contrast to the blizzard raging against the window pane. The only light came from the blinking amber LEDs of a vitals monitor and the grey, diffuse daylight filtering through the blinds. My grandfather, Arthur, was sitting in a hard plastic visitor's chair pulled uncomfortably close to the bed. He was still wearing his heavy wool coat, his fedora resting on his knees, his posture slumped in a way I had never seen before. He looked small, defeated. He was gripping the hand of the man in the bed with both of his own, his knuckles white, his head bowed as if in prayer or penance. The man in the bed, Thomas, looked less like a person and more like a collection of sharp angles under a thin hospital sheet. His skin was translucent, papery and pale, stretched tight over cheekbones that jutted out aggressively. A nasal cannula fed him oxygen, the hiss-click rhythm of the machine filling the silence between my grandfather's sobs. "Grandpa?" I whispered, stepping fully into the room. Arthur's head snapped up. His eyes were red, rimmed with moisture, his usually immaculate grooming disheveled. For a second, he looked at me with confusion, as if he didn't recognize his own grandson. Then recognition flooded in, followed immediately by panic. "Leo," he choked out, his voice a ragged rasp. I told you not to come." "I found the note," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my legs. I walked closer, ignoring the instinct to flee. "I found the address book. Grandpa, you need your medication. You're shaking." "I don't need pills, Leo. I need time." He stood up, almost knocking over the chair, placing his body between me and the man in the bed, shielding him like a secret he couldn't bear to share. "Go home. Please. This has nothing to do with you. This is my burden." "Arthur," a voice croaked from the bed. It was dry as dust, weak but carrying an undeniable weight. My grandfather froze. He turned back slowly. The man, Thomas, had turned his head on the pillow. His eyes were milky with cataracts, but they were fixed on me. "Let the boy come here," Thomas whispered. Arthur looked torn, his face a mask of agony. He looked at Thomas, then at me, and finally he stepped aside. He sank back into the chair, burying his face in his hands. I approached the bed. Up close, the devastation of age and illness on Thomas was even more apparent. But on the bedside table, sitting open, was the mahogany box my grandfather had guarded for decades. And it wasn't full of medals. I looked inside. It was full of photographs, but they weren't photos of Thomas. There was a photo of me on my first bicycle, a clipping from the local newspaper when my grandfather won the Civic Architecture Award in 1998, a Polaroid of my grandmother Eleanor laughing at a picnic I barely remembered, my high school graduation announcement. My breath hitched. Grandpa, these are us. These are our photos. No, Thomas wheezed, a faint, painful smile touching his lips. Those are my reports. I looked at Arthur. He was weeping openly now, silent tears tracking through the deep lines of his face. Leo, Arthur said, his voice trembling. This is Thomas Calloway. We served together in the 7th Infantry, Korea, 1952. We were brothers. But I thought, I stammered, looking at the man I had assumed was a stranger. You never mentioned him. Because I died, Thomas said. He coughed, a wet rattling sound that made the monitor beep faster. As far as the world knew, Corporal Thomas Calloway died on Hill 406 on Christmas Eve, 50 years ago today. I didn't know, Arthur said again, turning to me, pleading for me to understand. Leo, you have to believe me. The mortar hit the bunker, the roof collapsed. I was dragged out by the medics. I was blind for 3 days from the dust and the concussion. When I woke up in the field hospital, the lieutenant told me the bunker was gone. Everyone inside was listed KIA. I came home a survivor. I married your grandmother. I built the firm. I lived. He grabbed the bedrail. I lived because I thought you were gone, Tom. If I had known, my God, if I had known you were alive in that rubble. You would have come back, Thomas finished for him, and you would have died too. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just a lost friend, this was a resurrection. But the twist wasn't that Thomas was alive, the twist was in the box. I reached into the mahogany box and pulled out a stack of envelopes tied with twine. They were addressed to Arthur. The postmarks dated back decades, 1960, 1975, 1985, 2002. None of them had been opened. You wrote to him? I asked Thomas. No, Arthur interrupted, his voice sharp with self-loathing. He didn't write to me, Leo. I wrote to him. I stared at my grandfather. But you said you thought he was dead. I did, Arthur cried out. I wrote these to a dead man. Every Christmas Eve for 50 years, I wrote a letter to Thomas telling him about the life I was living, the life I stole from him. I wrote about marrying Eleanor, who Thomas loved first. I wrote about having your father. I wrote about you. I put them in this box because I couldn't bear to burn them, and I couldn't bear to read them. They were my confession. Arthur looked at Thomas, his eyes wide with a new, horrifying realization. But how? How do you have them? I kept this box in my study. It's been locked for 20 years. Thomas lifted a shaking hand and pointed to the bottom of the box. There, beneath the stack of letters, was a small silver key. I didn't have the letters, Artie, Thomas whispered. I had the key. The room went silent. The beeping of the monitor seemed to slow down. I didn't die in the bunker, Thomas said, his voice gaining a strange, lucid strength. I was dug out by the Chinese. I was a POW for 3 years. When I was released, I was broken. My legs were gone. My face, well, I didn't look like this back then. He gestured to the scars. I came back to the States in 55. I tracked you down. I saw you. You were in a park with Eleanor. She was pregnant with your son. You looked whole. You looked happy. Thomas paused, catching his breath. If I had walked up to you, a cripple, a ghost, the man who loved her first, it would have destroyed everything. You would have spent the rest of your life taking care of me out of guilt. Eleanor would have been torn apart. He looked at me, his eyes piercing. So, I made a choice. I decided to stay dead. I moved 2 towns over. I got a job as a draftsman working from home. I watched you, Artie. I watched you build your bridges. I watched your family grow. And every few years, when you left your house for the 4th of July parade, I would slip in. I knew where you kept the spare key. I found the box. I read your letters, and I put them back. My jaw dropped. The mystery of the staged house. The feeling I sometimes had as a child that someone was watching over us. You broke into his house? I asked. I visited my friend, Thomas corrected gently. I read your letters, Artie. I knew you felt guilty. I knew you missed me. And that was enough. It was enough to know that I wasn't forgotten. Why now? Arthur whispered, tears streaming down his face. Why did you call me today? Thomas closed his eyes. Because the cancer finally won, Artie. The doctors said I wouldn't see the new year. And I didn't want to die with you still thinking you left me behind. I wanted you to know you didn't leave me. I let you go. The weight of the sacrifice crashed down on the room. Thomas hadn't just survived. He had martyred his entire existence, his happiness, his name, just so my grandfather could have a guilt-free life. He had lived in the shadows of our joy for 50 years. Arthur collapsed. It wasn't a faint. It was a surrender. He fell forward, burying his face in the sheets covering Thomas's legs, sobbing with a raw, guttural sound that tore through the sterile air. It was the sound of a man's soul breaking and being put back together all at once. "I'm sorry," Arthur wailed, his voice muffled by the bedding. "I'm so sorry, Tom. I stole your life. I lived your life." Thomas moved his hand, his fingers trembling, and rested it on my grandfather's head. He stroked the white hair gently, like a father comforting a child. "You didn't steal it, Artie," Thomas whispered. "You lived it for both of us. Look at him." He gestured blindly toward me. "Look at the boy. If I had come back, if I had interfered, he wouldn't exist. The bridges wouldn't exist. You did good, Artie. You did good." I stepped forward, feeling like an intruder in this holy moment, yet knowing I was the proof of Thomas's gift. I reached out and took Thomas's other hand. It was cold. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick. "Thank you for my life." Thomas squeezed my hand, a weak, faint pressure. "Take care of him, Leo. He's going to have a hard time when I go." Suddenly, the monitor's rhythm changed. The beeps became erratic, fast, then slow. "Tom?" Arthur lifted his head, panic returning instantly. "Tom, don't you dare, not yet. We have time. I can move you. I can get you the best doctors." "No more doctors," Thomas breathed. His eyes were losing focus, staring up at the ceiling tiles. "It's Christmas, Artie. It's a good day to check out. I wanted to hear your voice one more time. Not in a letter, for real." Arthur scrambled to stand up, leaning over the bed, gripping Thomas's shoulders. "I'm here, Tom. I'm right here." "I'm not leaving the bunker this time. I'm staying right here." Thomas smiled. It was a genuine, peaceful smile that smoothed out the lines of pain on his face. "I know, Artie, I know." The alarm on the monitor blared, a high, continuous tone that signaled the end. Nurses rushed in, the door banging open. "Code blue, room 304. "No!" Arthur shouted, trying to fend them off. "Leave him alone! Let him be!" I grabbed my grandfather, pulling him back as the medical team swarmed the bed. He fought me, flailing, screaming Thomas's name, but I held him tight, wrapping my arms around his chest, feeling his heart pounding against my own. "He's gone, Grandpa," I whispered into his ear, tears running down my own face. "He's gone. You were there. You were there this time." Arthur went limp in my arms. We stood there, huddled together in the corner of the room, watching the frantic, futile efforts of the nurses. But I knew Thomas had already left. He had completed his mission. He had delivered the final clearance for Arthur's soul. The drive back to my grandfather's house was silent, but it wasn't the terrified silence of the morning. It was the sacred silence of a church after the service has ended. The blizzard had broken. The heavy grey clouds were fracturing, allowing beams of weak winter sunlight to pierce through and illuminate the vast stretches of untouched white snow. The world looked clean, new. Arthur sat in the passenger seat, the mahogany box resting on his lap. He didn't look at the road. He stared down at the polished wood, his fingers tracing the grain, tracing the invisible history of the letters inside. He wasn't crying anymore. The frantic, desperate grief of the hospital room had settled into something deeper, a solemn, heavy acceptance. He looked 10 years older than he had yesterday, yet somehow he also looked lighter. The secret that had been eating him alive for 50 years, the guilt of survival, had been excised. Thomas had taken it with him. When we pulled into the driveway, the house looked different to me. It wasn't just a structure of brick and mortar anymore. It was a monument to a lie that had allowed a family to exist. I looked at the front porch, where I had stood shivering hours ago. I realized that every Christmas morning, while we opened gifts and drank cocoa inside, Thomas had been out here, somewhere in the shadows, watching the warmth through the glass, warming himself with the knowledge that his sacrifice was working. We went inside. The house was still cold, the air still stale. I went straight to the thermostat and cranked the heat. I went to the fireplace and struck a match, watching the dry oak catch fire. The crackle of the wood was the first sound to break the spell. "Leo," my grandfather said. He was standing by the mantel, holding the black and white wedding photo of him and Grandma. "Do you think she knew?" I walked over to him. "Knew what?" "That he was alive, that he was watching us." I thought about it. I thought about my grandmother, a woman of sharp intuition and boundless empathy. "I don't know, Grandpa, but if she did, maybe she kept his secret too. Maybe that was her way of loving him back." Arthur nodded slowly. He placed the mahogany box on the mantel, right between the wedding photo and the picture of his platoon. He opened it, revealing the stack of unopened letters, the 50 years of confessions he had written to a ghost who was listening. "I'm not going to burn them," he said softly. "I thought I would. I thought when I died, this box would just disappear. But now—" He picked up the top letter, the one from 1953. "Now, they aren't letters to a dead man. They are conversations with a friend." He turned to me, his blue eyes clear and piercing. "You have to promise me something, Leo." "Anything." Thomas had no family, no children, no one to claim him. The state will want to put him in a pauper's grave. He straightened his back, the old soldier returning. "That will not happen. He was a hero. He saved my life twice. Once in Korea and once every day for the last 50 years. He is coming to us. He is going to be buried at St. Jude's, next to Eleanor." "Grandpa," I hesitated, that plot is reserved for you." "I know," Arthur said firmly. "I'll take the foot of the grave. I'll take the grass. But Thomas takes the stone next to her. They've been waiting a long time to be together without guilt. The funeral was 3 days later. It was a small affair, just me, my parents, who had flown back in a panic, confused and shaken by the story. Arthur and the honor guard I had fought to secure. The sky was a brilliant, blinding blue. The air was crisp. As the bugler played taps, the haunting notes drifting over the rows of granite, I watched my grandfather. He stood at attention, his hand raised in a salute that didn't waver for a second. He wasn't saluting a subordinate, he was saluting his savior. When the flag was folded, 13 precise triangles, the officer handed it to Arthur. Arthur held the flag to his chest. He looked down at the fresh earth covering Thomas, and then at the headstone of my grandmother next to it. For the first time in my life, I saw him smile, a real unburdened smile. The triangle was closed. The 3 of them were reunited. The mystery of that Christmas morning wasn't about a disappearance. It was about a return. It was about the things we do for love that no one ever sees. We live in a world that shouts its virtues, that posts every good deed for validation. But the greatest love I ever witnessed was silent. It was a man in a wheelchair, hiding in the dark, letting his best friend live the life he lost, just so he wouldn't have to ruin it. I learned something that day that no architecture degree could teach me. I learned that the strongest structures aren't built of steel or stone. They are built of sacrifice. They are built on the quiet, unbearable weight of the things we don't say and the people we let go. My grandfather lived another 4 years after that Christmas. Every Sunday, he would go to the cemetery. He would set up 2 lawn chairs in the grass, one for him and an empty one for Thomas. He would sit there for hours, reading the newspaper aloud, debating politics with the wind, laughing at jokes only the 2 of them understood. He wasn't lonely anymore. He had his friend back, and every Christmas morning at 8 a.m. sharp, before the music starts and the coffee is brewed, I walk to my own window. I look out at the empty street, at the snow falling silently on the world, and I whisper, "Merry Christmas, Thomas." Because I know now that the best gifts aren't under the tree. The best gifts are the ones who step aside so we can grow. We all have secrets in our family trees, stories of sacrifice that drift like ghosts in the hallways of our homes. If this story made you think of someone you miss, or someone you wish you knew better, take a moment today to ask the questions you've been afraid to ask, because sometimes the person you think you know has a hero living inside them, just waiting for permission to be found. If you want to explore more stories about the secrets that bind us and the love that redeems us, you are welcome to stay here with me. There are many more truths to uncover.